And this Terrapagos really, really needs it when it's going to be up against some of these more faster pieces on Alberto's side. So, what would it be to kick things off here for Nick to have that Terrapagos next to that Whimsicott, but for Alberto, it is going to be that Urshifu Rapid Strike and the Iron Hands.
Yeah, so if we immediately see some of those speed options, only one Whimsicott on the field, so Nick is the only player threatening Tailwind here, but Alberto has the Fake Out and the Choice Scarf on the other side to try to threaten damage back. Of course, a Surging Strikes into Terrapagos with the Terra Shell still active is not going to be a KO threat, and so even if you disrupt the speed control and try to go out on the offense, Terrapagos will probably still trade back well there, so you may be tempted to instead just Fake Out the Terrapagos, break that Terra Shell, and give Whimsicott the free turn instead. No restricted Pokemon on the field yet for Alberto. Oftentimes Miraidon is led to get the Electric Terrain back, would have boosted Iron Hands here, and it can always just Volt Switch off the field. But Alberto recognizing that that can be a difficult spot when Whimsicott's there and can immediately threaten a speed advantage for Terrapagos that puts Miraidon kind of under fire. So a little bit safer lead here.
Because Terrapagos just wants to retreat back because there is that threat of the Fake Out into even a close combat that would be able to take it out as well. So this Raging Bolt taking its place would be able to take it a little bit better, but also you are able to resist those Surging Strikes. That's going to be a U-turn though. Breaking the Focus Sash of this Whimsicott also allows Alberto to pivot in, maybe a more useful pick. You talked about the Miraidon potentially being in the back here to help increase this Iron Hands with that Quark Drive boost, but it is going to be the Whimsicott instead. So we've got mirrored Whimsicott on the field. Moonblast though, Iron Hands with the Assault Vest is able to take that much better, but it's still going to do about 40% damage. Maybe getting a little bit of it back though.
Yeah, Drain Punch will let it heal a little bit back, and two pretty small damage trades there. We get a Moonblast for some damage, a Drain Punch for some damage, a U-turn for a little bit of damage, but nothing super consequential happens this turn. Whimsicott a really great option to be able to pivot out into in the face of this Raging Bolt. Whimsicott, of course, immune to Thunderclap as long as it is going with a status move, and then immune to any Dragon moves from Raging Bolt as well. So it can really disrupt the Raging Bolt on the other side and can try to answer Tailwind if that's what Nick goes for.
This Iron Hands is still also going to be a problem. This Assault Vest is going to make this Iron Hands so beefy against all of the other special attack pieces that Nick has. We've already seen the Terrapagos as well as this Raging Bolt, and there's still also the threat of the Chi-Yu too.
Yeah, I do think I would also be careful of Iron Hands getting worn down. These are not the two Pokemon that Iron Hands is going to trade damage into best, and if it takes a lot of damage in this situation, it's kind of a lot harder time dealing with the Terrapagos in the back, as this Whimsicott goes for Tailwind and gets the speed in Nick's favor.
Ooh, well the Volt Switch into the Whimsicott on Alberto's side is also going to break its Focus Sash and provide another pivot to Nick, maybe feeling like this board state is a little bit better to bring that Terrapagos in, or as we can see, there is another threat that the Iron Hands would love to be in front of.
Yeah, Iron Hands loves those two matchups back there. Does have to watch out for that ground Terastallization on Chi-Yu with Terra Blast. So definitely more of a damage threat from Chi-Yu into Iron Hands than we're used to seeing. Nick taking his time here. This is a really important decision, which these Pokemon are coming in. This team, because it plays so offensively, it's often a little bit harder to find those right defensive pivots. You can see that first turn of defensive pivoting cost almost half of Raging Bolt and Whimsicott. You can't do that many times. So it's a really consequential decision which attacker you're going to get on the field in this moment and try to grab the momentum of the match with.
Well, it's nice because Nick did set up the Tailwind, so at least you know that you have the Terrapagos under those speed conditions, and even if Alberto was to match the Tailwind with his own Whimsicott, this Iron Hands is still going to move faster. But the Terrapagos is switching in to a Moonblast, so that Terra Shell is going to get broken and make this Terrapagos even more vulnerable when the Drain punches across the way, and that Terrapagos just switches into a one-hit knockout.
Yeah, just an absolutely massive turn. I think Alberto saw a vulnerable spot. The Raging Bolts on the other side can't protect itself as a threat that Alberto would be happy to attack into. We already know he has the Urshifu. If you get the Drain Punch and the Moonblast into Raging Bolt, that's still a lot of damage into a really important threat. But when the two Pokemon in the back for Nick are Chi-Yu and the Terrapagos, there's no safe switch into that either. And then because the Whimsicott went for Tailwind, that Volt Switch was the fastest thing moving. It meant it came out before the Moonblast from the Whimsicott on the other side, which allowed Terra Shell to get broken, which allowed Drain Punch to do so much damage, and really turn that turn into what could have been a small damage trade and just an absolutely punishing moment for Nick as he loses his restricted Pokemon before it even attacks once in this game.
Yeah, it feels like such a main source of damage that's been completely removed, and even though this Chi-Yu does have that ground Terra, as you were pointing out, in front of the Pokemon that I would really love to see, you still have to struggle with the fact that there is a Choice Scarf Rapid Strike Urshifu in the back that you're going to be vulnerable to.
Yeah, it does feel like there's some path for Nick still in this game. I do think that path starts with Chi-Yu going ground type and becoming a ground attacker. The Urshifu can be limited with the Raging Bolt threatening Thunderclaps out of the back, and so you can see some path where Nick has the right Pokemon on the field at the right time to disrupt what Alberto's trying to do, but it's going to be a very tricky path to walk, as Alberto is also able to use his Terastallization to make sure that that Iron Hand's not vulnerable to a ground-type Terra Blast, and now that the Terrapagos is gone, doesn't have to worry about a super effective Terra Starstorm either, is able to safely go for this Terastallization.
That is the biggest problem when you're facing up into a Terrapagos, is that you have to time that Terastallization perfectly so you aren't going to get those super effective Terra Starstorms. But the Terra Blast, even better way to use this Terastallization defensively, and that Iron Hands is going to be able to take that Terra Blast like a champ. The Whimsicott to double it up too is going to take that Iron Hands below 50%, but it's still alive and well to be able to get this Drain Punch off and recover so much of that HP that even if you see that double up again, Iron Hands will likely survive that.
Yeah, I think it would be a pretty close damage roll there, but you can see just how much value Iron Hands is providing. Has already given a valuable Drain Punch into Raging Bolt that's going to make it easier for Urshifu to have a spot in this game later, and then of course picked up the KO and Terrapagos, deals huge damage to Chi-Yu there, is really the MVP of this game so far, and it's not the most valuable Pokemon for Alberto. It can have the most impact, but when Alberto loses that Pokemon, he's still going to have that core offensive mode of what we expect to be the Miraidon in that fourth slot in the back, and Whimsicott, and Choice Scarf Urshifu. And so when Iron Hands provides this much value, just kind of trading away its own health bar that is so much in Alberto's favor.
Yeah, you've got two full health Pokemon in the back, and that's really scary to have to contend with. And as you're talking about Nick not being able to give up too many turns of repositioning, this Raging Bolt is going to come back in to try to keep that Whimsicott for later. Also calling a switch that Alberto is going to make here, with that Whimsicott also retreating into the back. The Urshifu going to take its place. Look at that HP. Feels really good to know that you have that full health Urshifu in the back. And the Terra Blast too, if you didn't think it was going to take 2 hits before, without that double up, it's definitely going to survive that. And with the Drain Punch back, it just feels like it's a wall. You can't take it down. How are you going to deal with this this Iron Hands?
Yeah, it just keeps healing back. Nick trying to be one turn ahead there brings the Raging Bolt in, because if Urshifu hits the field and is threatening an attack into Chi-Yu without Raging Bolt there to try to disrupt with Thunderclap, then things look extremely difficult for Nick. So he tries to be one turn ahead, get Raging Bolt on the field, but Alberto is one turn ahead of that. Throws a Drain Punch into the Raging Bolt, means it's down to just that low red health. It's going to be very easy for Alberto to find a window to take it down. And because Iron Hands only took one attack on that turn, heals back a lot of that just with the Drain Punch, means that the damage really isn't mounting on Iron Hands. It still looks like, with the right prediction, Alberto could get another attack with Iron Hands off and just keep mounting the damage.
Yeah, like even if there was another Terra Blast coming that Iron Hands way, it's going to be able to take that. But the Whimsicott is going to reposition in now as the Urshifu goes for the Surging Strikes. Not even going to call that with a Thunderclap. This Raging Bolt is just going to get taken down, even though it's going to resist these hits, and had a pretty good chunk of HP there. Still not going to be able to survive that. So just like that, Nick is down to the final 2 Pokemon in this game number 1, the Whimsicott and this Chi-Yu.
Yeah, I think Alberto making a very safe play there. The Raging Bolt has 2 targets it would like to attack into, a Water-type Urshifu and a Water-type Iron Hands, but it can only attack into one of them. It could have been a Thunderclap into the Urshifu, but even if Urshifu goes down, that means Drain Punch is going to land and KO that Raging Bolt. But instead, the Raging Bolt likely clicks a move into the Iron Hands and just goes down to Surging Strike before it can even attack, and makes this an even more impossible situation, as Nick just is going to concede this game, move on to game 2, try to find an easier path in a game where Terrapagos doesn't just go down on a switch in.
Yeah, what a great call by Alberto. Just seeing that as an opportunity. Once the Tailwind got set up and that Raging Bolt was faster, you called it perfectly. That Alberto was able to just see a very safe play that ended up reaping a huge reward.
Yeah, I mean, I think playing against this kind of hyper offense team, once you get a small lead, a lot of times those teams don't have the right defensive kind of control options to avoid you just trading back with them. And so Alberto kept recognizing opportunities to just make sure and land trades. He doesn't have to always get the better side of them. As long as you have a lead, you can just keep pushing that and pushing that. And it was just a small damage lead after turn 1, but it turned into a huge damage lead after that trade with Terrapagos on turn 2. And then it was much easier to make even trades that would have been negative in your favor, like threatening the Surging Strikes into the possible Thunderclap from Raging Bolt, because Alberto was so far ahead.
So So how do you deal with the Iron Hands then? Because if you're Nick, that Iron Hands gave you a ton of trouble in that game number 1. So is there an easier way to just nuke it before it's able to keep getting away with all that big damage trade?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky position. I think that leading like one way to go about that is to have Tropicos on the field and just keep attacking into the Iron Hands. It is your biggest damage threat, holding the choice specs and being the restricted Pokemon. As soon as it comes off the field and has to find a way back in against Iron Hands, when Iron Hands trades damage against these other Pokemon so well, things start to look a lot more difficult for Nick. Of course, the reason that Tropicos switched out on turn 1 in the previous game is because Fake Out was being threatened, and Fake Out that can disrupt the Terra Shell and threaten damage from the partner is a big problem, and so Tropicos not led this time. Instead, it's the Gothitelle on the field next to Raging Bolt.
Wow, this is going to be a switch up for both of our players, though. Alberto did not bring this Fluttermane to that first game, even though we didn't get a chance to see the 4th and final. But the Fluttermane in front of this Gothitelle feels so nice when it's a Ghost type.
Yeah, so one of the big problems with Shadow Tag against Alberto's team is that there are 2 Volt switches, 1 U-turn and 1 Ghost type. It could be that all 4 Pokemon Alberto brought have a way out of Shadow Tag. And definitely these first 2 led on the field have a way out. The Fluttermane as a Ghost type is able to just switch out here if it wants to, but doesn't necessarily need to. It would love to fight against these 2 Pokemon. Isn't really threatened by that much damage from either of them and can trade a bunch of damage back. And they're 2 Pokemon that if Fluttermane can, put a bunch of damage in a Raging Bolt and there is an Urshifu in the back, that starts to look a lot easier. If you can put a lot of damage into Gothitelle, then you can take away that control option. And of course, Iron Hands doesn't have the same kind of damage trade, really vulnerable targets that it would like, but still putting Drain Punches into Raging Bolt will be really valuable. For this turn, just going to flinch after a Fake Out from a Gothitelle.
Oh, well, Fluttermane is actually going to go for the taunt into the Gothitelle, so it is going to be able to shut down its own Helping Hand and taunt as the Volt switch from the Raging Bolt does do a little bit of damage there to that Fluttermane and is going to allow Nick to get another reposition. But this is where things started to look a little dicey there for Nick in that game number 1, where you have this really big decision to make, knowing that your team wants to play more offensively than this.
Yeah, at least this time you don't have to worry that there's damage coming into that slot. Iron Hands will just flinch at the end of this turn, and Fluttermane has already attacked. Tropicos might like to come in here. You can keep the Iron Hands from just switching out, and of course if it tries to Volt Switch out, it'll be the last thing moving, so you'll definitely get an opportunity for Tropicos to attack into that slot. Maybe the idea for Nick was to get Tropicos in and go for a big Helping Hand, Choice Specs, Terra Starstorm, and deal a ton of damage into Iron Hands, but the Gothitelle being taunted means that there's not quite that same damage threat, and you can't afford to have like a Moonblast Drain Punch combination into Tropicos that just takes it down, and so instead it's Whimsicott coming onto the field next to Gothitelle.
Well, there is an attacking move available for the Gothitelle outside of the Fake Out. It's a foul play, and if there's anything that this Iron Hands is, it can be a beefy attacker. So maybe just do a little bit of damage to it.
Yeah, those are really poor damage trades when you resist that foul play. It is a lot of attack, but it's not the boosted attack yet. No Miraidon, no electric terrain. So there are damage trades that probably just get Drain Punched back. The good news is that it's a very passive situation for Nick. Gothitelle and Whimsicott aren't going to be threatening a ton of damage. They aren't going to be solving this problem, but they aren't the biggest most valuable Pokemon on his side either, and so taking damage into them isn't the most critical failure.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Gothitelle gets to escape for this turn. The Raging Bolt now going to re-enter the field, but this Whimsicott going for Encore means that this Fluttermane is going to get locked into going for that taunt. Not the best of targets either. Like, the Raging Bolt is going to have all attacks, but at least you know that if you're on Nick's side, you've started to whittle away at some of these options and maybe are able to predict a switch from this Fluttermane if you think that Alberto wants to reset that taunt.
I do think this is kind of the sign of the problem with the passive position that Nick was in. Whimsicott could get an Encore into Fluttermane, keep it from attacking, but all that really happens on that turn is Iron Hands landing Drain Punch into Raging Bolt, picking up pretty valuable damage. Whittling down that Raging Bolt is really key for Alberto because it stands up so well against so many of his Pokemon. And Whimsicott gets the Encore, but Fluttermane doesn't get to attack that turn. Whimsicott doesn't really get to attack that turn either. It's just kind of a traded passive turn. Both players not really left doing much with those Pokemon. Both may switch out this turn. Whimsicott may be able to start building Moonblasts into Iron Hands, but those are just things that can get easily Drain Punch healed back over time, and Nick can stay stuck in this kind of passive position, or he's just happy to taunt his Whimsicott and leave it just Moonblasting for the rest of its time on the field.
Yeah, well, Nick didn't fall for that, so at least the Moonblast is going to be able to land into the Iron Hands. It's going to do a nice chunk of damage as the Volt Switch into the Flutter Mane. Might even be a 3-hit knockout at this point, but more importantly, you get a chance to reset this Gothitelle. You have fake out pressure if you want to, or you can bring in your big damage dealer in the Terapagos. The Whimsicott is not able to go for the Tailwind though, which is the hardest part.
Yeah, so there'll be no speed advantage easily gained for Nick. The Terapagos comes back on the field. The Drain Punch is going to go into Terra Shell and be resisted, but still is pretty valuable chip damage back, especially because the Terra Shell is now broken.
Yeah, because now at this point too, like if you can't hit the Tailwind, this Flutter Mane is also not a huge problem because it's also still Encored into Taunt, but it's gonna expire in a couple of turns, and Alberto still has options in the back.
There could be a really critical damage calculation here. If Terra Starstorm plus Moonblast is enough damage to pick up Iron Hands, this is the kind of position where the offense can just go from 0 to 60 and overwhelming so fast. But if it misses that KO and Iron Hands elects to stay on the field, for Alberto, the Drain Punch back would heal off so much of the damage you've done and deal a ton of really valuable damage into Terapagos. It'd be interesting if Alberto wants to opt in to that damage trade or just switch in, but there's nothing that switches in easily to a Terra Starstorm plus a Moonblast. So this could be a really pivotal moment. This is Nick's opportunity he's built over several turns to go out on the offense. Flutter Mane forced to switch because all it can do is taunt this turn against an already taunted Pokemon and a Choice Specs holder, and so it's Whimsicott switching in to take this combination attack.
Well, it's nice too because you know that Whimsicott's going to be able to stick around with that Focus Sash. As long as it doesn't get doubled into, it should be able to stick around. But Nick is going to go for that Stellar Terrestrialization onto the Terapagos. It's time to see the big turtle, see what it's all about. And it's definitely going to be able to do some damage into both of these Pokemon, but will it be enough? As the Whimsicott goes for the Moonblast into the Iron Hands, it's able to chip it down to about 25%. But with the Terra Starstorm follow-up here from this Terapagos, is it a Assault Vest going to actually keep this Iron Hands alive? And the answer to that is no! Brings the Whimsicott down to its Focus Sash as well, and the biggest problem for Nick in that game number 1 is off the field. Yeah,
that damage looked like it was way more than enough. The Moonblast being super effective means that the Whimsicott can have a pretty important offensive potential in this match, especially because the Iron Hands is such a critical target. And that made that double up look so easy. Nick takes the Whimsicott down to 1 HP, gets rid of the Iron Hands, really valuable turn that he spent several turns positioning to find his way into, with the damage built up a little bit on the Iron Hands, and no worry that the Terapagos would have just gone down on that turn. But of course, taking a KO just means that Miraidon enters the field for the first time for Alberto, ready to try to trade damage in this position.
And it's tough because the Terapagos already terastallized. Had the Terapagos been able to terastallize while that Electric Terrain was active on the field, it would have been able to remove that. So now this Miraidon, not many ways that you're able to shut down that Electric Terrain that this Miraidon is going to get the boost from.
Yeah, it's going to still pump out that massive damage, and that taunt from Flutter Mane into Whimsicott a few turns ago also limits Nick's options. Can't try to grab the speed advantage there, and so instead it's just the Gothitelle switching in for Terapagos, recognizing that Terapagos was not positioned to be able to take an attack from this now Terra Electric Miraidon that's doesn't have the Choice Specs damage, but it's still pumping out just enormous amounts of damage.
Yeah, you still get the beefed up Electro Drift on top of the Electric Terrain stab, the stab on the Pokemon, plus that Electric Terra, and that Gothitelle just gets taken out in one hit. Oh my goodness, this is where Alberto saw the tides be able to swing in his favor, and he's gonna go out with a home run. This Moonblast too, just to be able to help get this Whimsicott whittled down in HP. It's gonna at least break the Focus Sash there. And maybe even better, Alberto now has a free switch back into the Flutter.
Yeah, Flutter Mane going to enter the field, already has its booster energy used back up, but is still going to come out and be relevant in this game. This is what we touched on in Game 1, where Iron Hands can feel like the raid boss. It can feel like it's so difficult for Nick to find a way to take it off the field, but it isn't actually the most crucial Pokemon on Alberto's side of the field. It isn't the core piece of that offensive attack. That's the Miraidon, Whimsicott, and in this case, the Flutter Mane as the second attacker with it. And so when so many resources, so much time positioning is spent to take down Iron Hands, it just opens things up for Miraidon to take that big one-hit KO onto the Gothitelle as it switches in. This Miraidon also, because it doesn't have the choice specs, isn't locked into an electric move, can just go threaten the Raging Bolt and threaten the KO right now if it wants to.
What's nice too is that the Encore, the taunt onto the Whimsicott did expire as well, so Nick is free to go for that speed control that is going to really help to make sure that this Terapagos can still stand tall against something like this Miraidon.
Absolutely. It also means that electric Terastallization from Miraidon could be costly. It means the Terra Starstorms are now super effective out of the back.
Ooh, and it's not even going to be the Thunderclap. With that Tailwind, that Raging Bolt is going to be faster. Not even opting to try to play that mind game of whether this Fluttermane would end up going for something like the Taunt. But the Draco Meteor into the Raging Bolt is going to be enough for that one-hit knockout. But here's the problem. Miraidon does not have any partners left. It cannot switch off the field, so it's going to have to take that special attack drop.
It's going to be stuck on the field with no partners, with a super effective Terra Starstorm on its way in and no way to deal enough damage into this Terapagos. And so Nick gets the KO on Iron Hands, has to give up a big KO in return because of the positional advantage Alberto regained after that KO, but it was just too little too late for Alberto, because then once that taunt expired, Tailwind was able to go up. I think a really crucial Moonblast from Whimsicott on Nick's side of the field as well. On that turn where Gothitelle went down, the Whimsicott on Nick's side was able to get a Moonblast off and KO the Whimsicott on Alberto's side, which stuck Alberto with just those final two Pokemon on the field and meant that he didn't have speed control for the closing moments of that game, which just made it very easy for Nick to position Terapagos back on the field once again with a huge damage threat.
I was gonna say, does that endgame look any different if Alberto instead opts to go for a Tailwind instead of a Moonblast with that Whimsicott?
I think ultimately it might have, right? The Fluttermane would have, the Raging Bolt would have been forced to Thunderclap into the Fluttermane instead, might not have been enough damage, or Fluttermane could have more easily kept itself from being hit. But ultimately, the biggest problem was the need to Draco Meteor without something else to switch back out into, which meant the damage really disappeared for the Miraidon and meant that Terapagos, while it didn't actually have to take an attack at all because it had the speed advantage and the damage output, would have been able to take an attack from that Miraidon, which meant that kind of Alberto wasn't one turn behind there, he was 2 turns behind enough damage to stay in that game.
Yeah, and contrary to the Miraidon team that we saw from Rajan Ball and Aaron Trailer, this Miraidon being Covert Cloak has an opportunity to go for Protect, but it means that it's a lacking Discharge. So there's no spread damage on this Miraidon, so it might look a little funny, like, hey, you've got 2 other Pokemon on the side, but you don't have an ability to hit them both.
Yeah, it means that Miraidon can't establish those kind of surefire checkmate in games where you just see everything ready to go down to close combat. So we're going to be stuck using single targeted attacks, which are a little bit easier to protect into and find a way back out of. I'm really excited to see this Game 3 and see how both players adjust. It felt like in Game 1, Alberto was able to just win off the Iron Hands, was able to trade enough Drain Punches back that Nick never found a way in, and felt like he tried to rely on that again in Game 2. But Nick found the right positioning to just take Iron Hands off the field, and then it felt like his offense was overwhelming once it happened. I think Alberto has to have either a game plan to be a little bit more careful with the Iron Hands, be cautious with what damage trades it takes, so that it doesn't end up in range for a double up with the Terra Starstorm, or has to have the right partners to make sure that if Iron Hands goes down, there's enough damage coming back from his side of the field. The Fluttermane felt like it really didn't accomplish much in that game. It got a few taunts off, but it got encored, and then eventually just went down to a combination of, I think, 2 Volt Switches and a Thunderbolt. That isn't to say the Urshifu would have done more in that situation, right? The first Volt Switch might have just taken down the Urshifu. And so it does look like there's kind of a gap where it's hard for Alberto to find what that 4th Pokemon is that can provide enough damage next to Miraidon. And you also have to kind of determine where you're going to position that extra Pokemon. Is it going to be in the early game next to Iron Hands to try to win off that situation, or are you just trying to wait and have the right position next to Miraidon and focus on that angle?
If you bring the Fluttermane again, I wonder if you opt to just lock into some type of damage at the very beginning instead, knowing that the Encore is something that this Whimsicott is going to threaten. But both Alberto and Nick, once again, switching it up here with the Chi-Yu on the field for both of them.
Yeah, there were no Chi-Yus in the last game. There are suddenly 2 Chi-Yus on the field ready to fight each other in this game. Whimsicott only on Nick's side of the field means the speed advantage is his if he wants it, but it actually starts with the speed advantage because of the Choice Scarf on Chi-Yu as well. Fluttermane and Chi-Yu, though, 2 bigger attackers on Alberto's side of the field. The KOs are there for Alberto if he can survive the turn. The Fluttermane might be in KO range from a Choice Scarf Overheat, depending on how it's trained, which would then limit just one attack from Alberto's side of the field, and probably with a Focus Sash and Whimsicott and Chiyu's typing mean that the Chiyu on the other side can't actually take a KO. But of course, it can also just start to Snarl and reduce the outgoing damage from Nick's side of the field and try to more slowly approach this beginning to this game, but that might require a Flutter Mane Protect, which can just be on court. So a very tricky little opening here.
And Overheat could also just miss. Let's not forget that that is not a 100% accurate move, and that could be devastating. But the Chiyu is going to use its glasses, hit the Overheat, and the crit might not have mattered. We know what this Chiyu can do, especially when Beads of Ruin is active with those Overheats. Wild. The Snarl in response is going to help limit that special attack a little bit from that Chiyu, but I feel like it got what it wanted. A huge damage threat out of the way.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong start for Nick. Establishes the speed control with Tailwind. Even though he didn't need it in that position, it means that you're less likely to get pinned a turn or two from now because Tailwind will be there and ready on his side of the field. And yeah, you give up a Snarl, it breaks the Focus Sash and lowers Chiyu's special attack even further, but Chiyu already overheated. It wasn't going to be really wanting to stay on the field and continue attack from that position anyway. So if you're going to be forced to switch Chiyu out, the extra Snarl probably doesn't matter too much, but this is Alberto's time to fight back. This is now a pretty passive position for Nick. Chiyu is going to need to switch out to be able to accomplish much offensively, and if there's not a good switch into that Chiyu spot, that could be a very vulnerable position. Of course, Whimsicott also vulnerable to just a Heat Wave from the other side. I mean, if you throw a Heat Wave and Drain Punch double up, where Heat Wave is threatening KO into Whimsicott, Drain Punch throwing a KO into Chiyu, and there aren't good switch-ins, that early advantage of just taking down the Flutter Mane can get evened out so quickly here.
I mean, you could also just kind of do that regardless if you think that the Chiyu is going to switch out or not, because that Terapagos might not want to take that either. But as we head into this next turn, I feel like this is where we need to continue to see some of Nick's patience. Doesn't want to give up some of that momentum right away with making a big pivot or a big change-up.
You also just need to establish chip into Iron Hand. So even though this Overheat isn't at full strength, it's still a little bit of chip, right? And if the goal is just to establish enough chip that Terra Starstorm is now a KO, well, that's definitely making progress there, and this Moonblast making even more progress.
Yeah, I mean, that double up is going to do huge amounts of damage, and the Snarl from the Chiyu, it's just going to help to continue to cover for any switch-ins that might happen. If the Terapagos switches in, you're able to get a nice special attack drop on that, but maybe giving Nick what he wanted. That Drain Punch is going to help to heal up the Iron Hands, but more critically, this Chiyu already wanted to leave the field, especially at -6. So now you get a free switch in regardless.
Yeah, I think this actually plays out really well for Nick. The Iron Hands started that turn at 100% health, is now at about 50%, is easily in KO range from a Moonblast plus Terra Starstorm double up, which is kind of what spelled the beginning of the end for Alberto in that last game. And the Chiyu was not the most valuable Pokemon at that point, and Nick recognizing it had more, the cost of trying to save it by switching it out was more than it was still worth at that point. The Chiyu on the other side is just locked into the Choice Spec Snarl. Is it going to be able to pick up a KO on Whimsicott, and it's just going to, get a valuable Terra Shell break on the Terapagos if the Terapagos doesn't just Terastallize itself this turn and threaten as much damage as possible coming on the other side. But it really feels like now the momentum is in Nick's side, again, because of the KO taken by Alberto, right? You have a little bit of momentum shift because Flutter Mane goes down and Alberto has the two attackers coming in, but Nick is able to just trade the Chiyu going down on his side of the field to reestablish that momentum, have his restricted Pokemon in the position it wants to be in, and make things look really difficult for Alberto. Of course, there's also only one Pokemon left unrevealed for Alberto. That means there cannot both be a Tailwind waiting and a Miraidon waiting. Should be just a Miraidon without speed control in the end game for Alberto.
Ooh, well, here's a really interesting lock-in, as we do see the Miraidon now take that Chiyu's place. It's going to help to set up the electric terrain for this Iron Hands, give it a little bit of that Cork Drive boost, and it is going to end up giving over an attack boost. So nice way to be able to boost up a Drain Punch or something if you're able to help break that Terra Shell. Now don't even have to do that, as this Terra Shift is going to activate. You're going to see that big turtle hit the field, but more critically, this is what we were talking about in game number 2. Miraidon just switched in. It set the electric terrain, and with this terrestrialization to the Stellar Terra type and Terraform Zero activating, the electricity is gone. There goes your terrain, and there goes the Cork Drive as well as the Hadron Engine boost.
Yeah, Miraidon just switching in at such an unfortunate time here, but does not take a Terra Starstorm. Instead, it's Earth Power locked into to KO Iron Hands. The turn doesn't go as disastrously for Alberto as it could have, but still looks like it might have gone so disastrously that it's going to be really difficult for Alberto to find a way back in. Miraidon switches in and immediately loses its electric terrain, and Iron Hands just goes down on that turn, locking Alberto with just these final two Pokemon on that field. That means there will never be electric terrain. There's no way to get out and back in, and Nick still has 3 Pokemon, the Whimsicott and Terapagos combination, able to threaten so much damage into the Miraidon and Chi-Yu, and then 1 unrevealed Pokemon in the back that could help close out this game.
Yeah, and I think this is such a critical protect here for Nick because as you got a chance to see, there's 1 turn of Tailwind left, and this Terapagos is really going to need that speed control in order to make sure that it is outspeeding this Miraidon. But can this Miraidon actually take this hit? One of the nice things about locking into Earth Power is you know that the Earth Power is going to be super effective into the Iron Hands, the Miraidon, and the Chi-Yu if they don't, and even if the Miraidon terrestrializes, still going to hit it super effective. So it's a really smart lock-in.
Yeah, Nick recognizing that with 1 unrevealed Pokemon left and Miraidon not shown, that it had to be that Pokemon. And so the 3 that were left were, like you mentioned, the Chi-Yu, the Iron Hands, and the Miraidon, all weak to Earth Power. The Chi-Yu is going to terrestrialize out of its weakness to Earth Power. That was Alberto's one way to get 1 Pokemon that isn't weak to that Choice Specs Earth Power on the field. But it's going to mean Miraidon is left hanging here.
Miraidon's left hanging, but and maybe this Terapagos a little bit more vulnerable, but it is going to just go for the protect. So a smart call here, knowing that the Terapagos is threatening such a super effective Earth Power, will be able to protect itself from that, and it's going to carve out an opportunity for this Chi-Yu to do something impactful as the Heat Wave. The Whimsicott's going to be able to protect itself, but can it hit this Terapagos? And yes, it does. It's going to do about 50% there, which is huge. Gets the burn, maybe putting a timer on this Terapagos, but it feels good to get that damage down.
It does, but I think Alberto was looking for a little bit more there, recognizing that maybe the one path back into this game is Miraidon protecting itself while Chi-Yu KOs Whimsicott before a second Tailwind can go up. But Nick, smart enough to not let that happen, is able to protect or can now get a Tailwind and an Earth Power and keep trying to pump the damage into Miraidon. Now, if Heat Wave just comes out and KOs these 2 Pokemon, it's going to be down to what is left in the back for Nick. If it's the Raging Bolt like we've seen in the other games, well, that can probably win an in-game against a Ghost Chi-Yu with Heat Wave. But either of the other 2 Pokemon are going to have a lot more difficulty.
For sure. And so, like, you can still see Nick kind of taking his time, but it feels like, to me, just set up the speed control and just make sure that this Terapagos is going to be able to at least KO 1 Pokemon. But you have to choose, and you have to choose wisely. This Miraidon's going to try to go for the double protect, but it doesn't get it. So this Earth Power is going to lock into that Miraidon after we see this Tailwind go through. But is it going to be enough to actually get the KO here? Miraidon has a good amount of natural bulk, but I think when you're looking at the Choice Specs Terapagos, it's just too powerful, especially next to a Pokemon. It's going to help lower that Miraidon's special defense. But the Heat Wave is going to be able to knock out both the Whimsicott and the Terapagos. So what is in the back here for Nick, and is Alberto happy with what's in the back?
Yeah, I think Alberto right to go for the double protect there. Miraidon just going to go down otherwise, and definitely a path to winning this game is getting that double protect, Heat Wave taking those 2 KOs, but it's Gothitelle in the back. This is going to be a really interesting now in-game. The Raging Bolt would have been a lot easier. The Gothitelle probably going to get 2-hit KO'd by Heat Wave. Foul Play, I imagine, does not 1-hit KO Chi-Yu back. This could be a situation where the exact stats of the Chi-Yu become relevant,
Yeah.
but I have to imagine that even with max attack, this Chi-Yu, not even a 2-hit KO, just safely able to take that. And the Tailwind, that Heat Wave does so much, almost picks up the KO. The Foul Play not able to get the KO even
But it's
with...
got a hit. Okay, I was nervous for a second there with a little bit of a lag, but it did hit. The Heat Wave connects, and Alberto Lara brings back the set after that loss in game number 2 to take it.